Welcome into this bonus content where we are going to get into how you find some particular things in a birth chart. These are questions that you probably have yourself and that I get asked all the time. We're going to start with finding what career path most suits a person. And I want you to keep in mind that there are always going to be a number of career paths that can fit into the astrological delineations. So it doesn't have to be like you're going to teach fifth grade. It can also show you education, particularly with children, or maybe medical field, whether that is doing imaging services, nursing, or something else. So keep in mind there's going to be a number of different ways that you can work with this information. So for career, we are going to be focusing on the midheaven. When you take a look at a chart, you locate that MC, medium coeli, up at the top of the chart. That is what a person is going to be known for. So this is why we look at this for career. It is often situated in the 10th house. So we're going to take a look at the 10th house here in just a minute as well, but we're going to start and focus on that midheaven. So with the midheaven, you want to investigate what sign it is under, and if there are any planets within 5 degrees conjunct, meaning sitting next to that midheaven. It would also be beneficial to see any aspects the midheaven is taking to other planets. So in this example chart, the midheaven is in Scorpio, and we know that Scorpio has a traditional ruler of Mars and a modern ruler of Pluto. So we do have to consider both of those planets in our delineation. With this particular individual, we have Mars in the 8th house and we have Pluto in the 9th house. So we have a theme of 8th house intensity, which this is doubled because the 8th house is Scorpio's natal house. It's its natural house. Intensity, investigation, and we also have the theme of the broad mind, 9th house. So higher learning, philosophy, understanding things on a huge scale. So this is Sagittarius's natural house. So you pull in those indications of those signs. We want to then see, do we have anything aspecting Mars and Pluto? And indeed we do. We want to really focus on the closest aspects, particularly the beneficial ones. So with Mars in this particular chart, we have a nice close 0-degree sextile to Mercury. So there's a great need, not even need, but there's a great ability here to think and communicate. And Mercury being our planet of communication and thinking. So this person, we're going to now pull in the themes that we've already discussed: intensity, scorpionic power, investigating the truth. And now we're going to bring in somebody who's really good at thinking and communicating, figuring stuff out, right? We also want to take a look and understand that Mars being in the 8th house, it is also in this house under Virgo. Virgo is analytical. So this individual is great at analyzing the deep information that they discover. They're very intelligent when they think and they sort these things out. The other thing that Mars is doing is making a very nice trine to to Chiron. There we go. I'm like, I lost it here for a second. Mars is making a very nice trine to Chiron. Chiron is the wounded healer. It's where we are wounded and also where we heal. So we have an energy drive, an ability with Mars to create healing for the native and for those that the native comes into contact with. So we're keeping all of this in mind as we go through our delineation. We also want to take a look at Pluto being the modern ruler of Scorpio, and here in the 9th house. So we discussed 9th house, higher mind, broad-minded views, philosophy, religion, politics, travel, foreign affairs. And we want to see what Pluto is doing. So Pluto is making a pretty close 1 degree, a little bit less than a degree, trine to the sun. And the sun is about our willpower. It is our core identity. It is our ego expression. So we have somebody who is intensifying in a positive way, because it's a trine, their sense of presence, ego, and authority. We also want to take notice of the fact that the planet Uranus is sitting within 5 degrees of the midheaven. Uranus indicates change and also the unusual. So this individual may often change careers. We see this quite frequently with Uranus on the midheaven. Also, those careers that don't seem just so run-of-the-mill standard. There's something a little different, a little quirky about having the Uranus sitting up here on the midheaven. This person is going to be known for being quite unique. So we want to take in that understanding as well. So we're building all of these things. And then lastly, we're going to take a look at the aspects to the ascendant. So it is opposite the moon. And this is a little troubling because the moon is the emotional self. It's almost like this person is going to have to pull their emotional self away in order to excel in their career. There's always going to be a bit of a push-pull, a back and forth, a balancing act that has to be done. So we want to advise them in a way that is not going to force them to deny who they are and their own emotions and take away from that emotional expression that they're going to need to have. We don't want this person to be so focused on their career that they can't even deal with their own stuff, because we know that's going to be an issue. The other thing that we want to take a look at is other positive aspects. And in this case, we do have some minor aspects. We do have the quintile, which we don't discuss in this course, but the quintile is a minor aspect that denotes gifts. And with a quintile between the midheaven and Mars, there's going to be a natural gifting to have a great bit of drive towards career. So now that we have these things in mind, you, of course, are going to want to delineate the entire chart, because that's who this person is. We need to understand who they are in order to advise or to understand what career is going to suit them best. But these are the things that we're really going to home in on for career. In this case, this individual is a forensic psychologist. And so now we have pulled in every indication of what their chart is talking about. So we do have somebody who has more authority, power, that Scorpio intensity. Somebody who likes to investigate and really get into the muck of it, the deep stuff, and sort it out. So now we have got that 8th house Mars in Virgo. Virgo is very analytical. Somebody who is quite good at talking, very good at communicating with other people. So we have that sextile between Mercury and Mars as well. And we do know that this is maybe not always the best path for them, because it might be hard for them to separate their own emotions from what they're dealing with at work. And certainly a forensic psychologist is not somebody that you run into every day. There is the Uranus conjunct the midheaven. Another question that I get very frequently is about love and marriage and how likely that is in the chart. And there are a few considerations that I want to point out first. Number one is, if we have Saturn in the 7th house of marriage, you are frequently, or almost always, I hate to say it, but true, almost always going to find somebody who marries later in life, and or a lot of times it can do both, marry somebody who's a bit older than them, more than 2-3 years older than them. Typically we're looking at 8+ years older than the native. So Saturn certainly can delay marriage, and it can also usually doesn't preclude it, but delay it, and then also make that native more apt to marry somebody older, more mature than them. This can also be the case if Saturn is the ruling planet of the 7th house. So if Capricorn is on the cusp, the beginning of the 7th house, we are often going to find some of those delineations, although not as much. The strongest is going to be if Saturn is on the descendant, meaning Saturn is opposite of the ascendant, the rising sign. If it is in opposition, so Saturn sitting there on the descendant, we are going to find that first delineation of delayed marriage or marrying somebody older as being very, very likely. The other one is having the planet Uranus in the 7th house, or contacting the ruling planet of the 7th house, and again, the strongest if it is on the descendant. Somebody who has Uranus here is typically going to find partners who are pretty unusual and quirky, but the bigger thing that I see is divorce. Unfortunately, divorce is fairly common for people who have Uranus in the 7th house, particularly if it is close to the descendant. Again, look at the ruler of the 7th house as well and see if it is aspecting, especially if it is a negative aspect, such as a square or an opposition. If Uranus is doing that with the chart ruler, our likelihood of divorce goes up. Now, this is not to say that people who don't have that get off scot-free. The other one is Jupiter. Jupiter is the planet of blessing and expansion. We don't always want it to expand our amount of partners or amount of marriage. We usually, I think most of us, when we get married, we want that to be our person for the rest of our lives. So when you have Jupiter in the 7th house, what we typically come across is somebody who has more than one marriage. Now, this does not guarantee that, it just makes it much more likely, again, especially if it is on the cusp of the 7th house, the beginning of it, i.e. the descendant. Now, before you get very nervous about this, also understand that having Jupiter in the 7th house frequently makes that native, that person's chart, that person who owns that chart, gives them some blessings. When they marry someone, they typically are marrying up. They're typically marrying somebody who can expand their worldview and help them in some way. It's usually a very beneficial marriage. This is also the case if Jupiter is the ruling planet for the 7th house. So quite particularly with Sagittarius and the 7th on the 7th house cusp, or also Pisces, because Pisces' traditional ruler is Jupiter, its modern ruler is Neptune. However, it does not always mean that you're going to be married multiple times or that Jupiter is going to spell divorce. A lot of times, because Jupiter is such a fortunate planet, it still does its work of creating blessing. And in the particular chart that I am showing you here, we have a lot to talk about with the 7th house. Number one, you will see that the moon is exactly, well, just about exactly, on the descendant. It's here in Pisces, and this tells me that the individual owning this chart absolutely loves love and wants that, seeks out long-term relationships, partnerships, and marriage. It's extremely important to them. It is also conjunct Jupiter, sitting right next to Jupiter, which is going to make that effect of the moon greater. This is somebody who has a really big heart, big emotions, and it's in Pisces. So Pisces is the ruler of the 7th house in this case, because it begins the 7th house. And we've got those double duty indications of Jupiter going on here, because again, Jupiter is the traditional ruler of Pisces. So in this case, this individual actually got married fairly young due to an unexpected pregnancy, got married very quickly when his wife was expecting. And they were together for approximately a year before they separated. They both saw other people, and over the next about 7 or 8 years, they were not together. They maintained contact. They had some moments where it seemed like perhaps more was going to happen, but then eventually time went on, and about 8 years after their son, when their son was about 8 or 9, this couple got back together. So the divorce was never finalized, and that is kind of having 2 marriages. It just so happened to be to the same person. So when you're looking at aptitude for marriage, these are some first indications that you'll want to take a look at. The other thing you're going to want to do is take a look at any planets that are in the 7th house, even if they're not the ones that I just discussed. Look at the planets that are in the 7th house. Also investigate what aspects those planets, if there are any, are making, because those aspects are going to tell you the condition of that planet. How well is it working for or against the native? Then you are going to want to pay attention to the ruler of the seventh house and any aspects that it's making. The ruler is certainly going to make a difference, but even more so is the aspects, because if that ruling planet is a lovely planet like Venus, for example, and it's doing nothing but throwing nasty aspects to Saturn and Uranus, we're most likely going to have some problems with long-term partnerships such as marriage. The other thing to look at for love is the fifth house. Now, the fifth house is not about your long-term marriage-like relationships. The fifth house is about romance and love affairs. And that's okay, because you may very well set yourself up for seventh house long-term marriage by what's happening in the fifth house and your approach to it. So you're going to want to do the same things that I just discussed with the seventh house in the fifth house. The other thing is, a lot of people want to know when, and we have not got into transits in this particular program, but transits are what is happening with the planets real time in the sky and how they affect your chart. And one of the most ideal times to get married and to meet somebody who's going to be a marriage material is going to be when Jupiter, the planet of expansion, is transiting, moving through. So it'll take typically about a year to do so, going through your seventh house, or when it's making positive aspects, especially, although the square and the opposition and can also be beneficial because they can often spur us into action. But you look at when planets are making contact to the seventh house ruler as well. So for example, if you had, let's say, Aries on the cusp of the seventh house, then Mars is going to be the ruler. And whenever you see really nice contacts with Jupiter or Venus in particular, those are going to be lovely times to meet somebody. And you can also get some of that if you have nice contacts to, for example, Saturn, like a nice trine to Saturn. That could be a pull to settle down. Another thing that you could do is look at contacts to Uranus, positive contacts to Uranus, to the seventh house ruler, by transit, not by native placements. And positive contacts could indicate a chance encounter with someone. The next thing is compatibility. And I cannot teach you compatibility in this short clip, but I want to give you some starting pointers, at least to send you on your way for compatibility, because compatibility is really a pretty vast subject in astrology. When I, for example, am doing compatibility for a couple, and actually you can do compatibility for anyone. You don't have to look at it through a romantic lens. You can also look at it for your children, you and your children between your children, or bosses or best friends, etc. But most people want to know about love. So when I'm pulling compatibility, when I'm doing this for a client, the first thing that I have to do is delineate each native's chart. I have to figure out, who are these people and what do they even want? So for example, for a woman, they are typically looking for somebody who, long-term partnership wise, who is going to meet their Jupiter, what Jupiter is doing in their chart, what sign it's under, what aspects it's under. The other thing is Mars in a woman's chart is going to show something that she's going to find drive towards, passion towards, and Venus is going to be what turns her on. Now, for a man, it's very similar. They want somebody who is Venus. The indications of Venus are going to absolutely talk about what he finds attractive and valuable in a mate. And the moon is going to discuss how he's going to react and want to be reacted to on an emotional level. So we want to look at those things and understand who they are, who those people are, and what they want. Those are the first two charts that I'm going to pull, just their birth charts. The next thing that I'm going to pull is something called a synastry chart, and synastry is overlaying the chart of one person and another and looking at the interaction between the planets. And then the next thing that I'm going to pull is something called a composite chart. A composite chart is the midpoint picture. It's taking everybody's planets, both people, their planets, and averaging them. So a composite chart is averaging the planets by degree. Now, people get a little worked up about the signs, and in composite charts, I do not use signs. Most astrologers do not use signs because it is a midpoint picture. It's an average of where those planets go. It's kind of like saying, well, you know, if I am a Scorpio and I'm with somebody who is a Taurus, does that mean that we average out to be you know, a Leo or an Aquarius? No, that's not how it works. It actually is working just by the degrees. So you do pay very much attention to the aspects in a composite chart, and you also pay a lot of attention to the houses and the angles in a composite chart, but not the signs. So I'm actually pulling 4 charts at least. A lot of times I'll pull a Davison chart too, which we don't want to go into all of this, but because I can't get into a vast view of compatibility, which I really, really recommend is done to understand fully what we're dealing with a chart, with compatibility. But you just want the cursory, you just want the quick and dirty, right? Okay. So one of the first things you're going to want to see is some kind of contact, preferably positive contact, in the synastry chart, between the sun and the moon. We really want them to be talking to each other. If they're not, as long as they're making some other decent aspects to other planets in the chart. For example, if we had a nice trine in the synastry chart between one person's sun and the other person's Mars, that would be very helpful. So we want to look at that, absolutely. The other thing that we want to pay attention to is we want to not see a bunch of inconjunctions. Even one in conjunction, depending on what planets it is, particularly personal planets, even one in conjunction can create a big problem. If you guys, you think about relationships that you've been in, it might be that you get along great and you have the same views and values and everything is rosy, but this one freaking problem just overshadows everything because you can't figure out how to correct it. And you don't even know where to begin. You just know something's not right. And that is the effect an inconjunction is going to have in the synastry chart. So we really want to see positive contacts between the sun and other planets, the moon and other planets, particularly between themselves. We also want to look for some good understanding between these individuals. So we want to see Mercury behaving cooperatively with the other individuals, any of their planets, but particularly their Mercury. We want to see that they can communicate well. So is Mercury being set up well? Is it making nice aspects to your partner's planets in general? We want to look at that. Another thing that is going to be very, very important, especially as we get older, because we want to find somebody that we're going to grow old with, is Jupiter. Jupiter really indicates, what our beliefs are, what we're going to find valuable, how do we want to live our lives? Do we share, or at least have compatible views on religion, on philosophy, politics, the big things, how we want to have children, etc. Do we have similar ideas there? And also, can we forgive one another? And so Jupiter is going to play that role very strongly. If you have a really nice moon and Jupiter contacts, that's going to help out a ton in the forgiveness department. But just having Jupiter set up well in a synastry chart is going to get you a long way. So we want to focus on all of those things. Your sex life, you're going to want to see what is Mars really doing. And for if somebody can speak your love language, we want to really see what the moon, emotions, and Venus, love, are doing with the other person's chart. So compatibility, this is not a simple subject, not one that we can easily cover in just a bit of a broad view, extra tips and tricks for astrology. But this is something to get you started so that you don't get a little too Neptunian about that new person you just met. Thanks so much for watching. I hope this was helpful and that you've enjoyed this course so far. Let me know if you're interested in personal consultations or in new course content going over other topics in astrology as well.